Today we're going to start sewing our love monsters together. So before we get started with sewing, we have to first thread our needle. So I'm going to take a piece of embroidery thread that looks pretty with my felt choice, and I am going to pull out a piece that is about arm's length. You don't want it much longer than your arm because otherwise it gets tangled more easily. Then I can cut it, making sure that the rest of the thread stays in a nice little bundle without getting all tangled up. Now I'm going to take my piece that I just cut, and I'm going to put this thread through the eye of the needle, which can sometimes be a little tricky, but I have some tips to make it a little bit easier. First of all, if you notice that the end of your thread is a little bit frayed, that means that these little ends are coming undone and they're sort of spreading apart. It's easier if you twist them back together a little bit. So you can twist it with your fingers, and that makes it pointier so that you can stick it through the needle. I also sometimes like to trim it a little bit. So you can trim off the little frayed area so that it's nice and pointy. And then I hold it in my fingers so that only a little tiny bit of the thread is sticking out. If it's a long piece, it's gonna flop around too much. So just a tiny, tiny piece is poking out, and then I try to get that tiny piece right through the eye of the needle. And then once you have a little tiny bit through, you're gonna grab it with your other hand and pull it through a few inches. So now I have a short end of string thread and then a very long end of thread to be sewing with. At the end of our long end is where we're going to put our knot. So at the very end, not in the middle, I'm gonna tie that knot just like so. So now I have my needle on, my short piece of thread, my long piece of thread with the knot at the end, and I'm ready to sew. So now I'm gonna take my pieces that I cut out, I'm gonna put the arms off to the side for now, and I'm gonna stack these two pieces together so that they are exactly on top of each other. If I did a good job cutting, they should line up pretty good and be about the same size. Now I'm going to start sewing today at the top of the ear, and then I'm going to come down the side of the body. You can start on the right side or the left side, that's up to you. So I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go up to the top of the ear, and from underneath I'm going to poke my needle up through both pieces of felt. And you might have to poke it a few times to get it to come up in the place where you want it to. There we go. Now once your needle is poked up so that it's pretty close to the edge but not too close, I'm going to pull it all the way through, pull, 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 and I'm going to keep pulling until my knot catches on the back. Okay, so I pull the thread all the way through. Now I'm going to come up through the bottom again, because we are going to be sewing our monsters with a whip stitch today. Pull, pull, pull all the way through, and there is my first stitch. Now I'm going to come up from the bottom again, just like so. Now as I'm sewing, I am trying very hard to make all of my stitches the same. I want them the same distance apart, and I want them the same distance from the edge of the felt. I'm also trying really hard not to make my stitches too big, because if your stitches are big, when we stuff them later on with polyfill, it will come out in the space between the stitches. So you really want the stitches to be close together. So I'm just going to keep on going, working my way down the side of my monster, trying to make my stitches as neat as possible. And sometimes you might have to kind of arrange your stitches a little bit, move them around so that they all look nice. And I'm just going to keep on going. As I'm sewing, I'm being very careful that my stitches are going through both the front and the back with each stitch. So you want to make sure that those two pieces are lined up the whole time so that you're getting both of them with each stitch. Now I'm going to keep on sewing until I get down to where I want the arm to go. Once I get there, I'm going to take my arm and I'm going to put it in between the front and the back piece. I want to put it in at least, oh, maybe 1/2 inch or so. You can put it in a little more if you want, but you want it at least 1/2 inch so that it doesn't fall out. Okay, so I'm putting it right in there like that. Now, once I have my arm in, I need to sew down this line so that it will hold my arm in place. Now, the thing that's a little bit different is instead of doing a whip stitch, we're gonna switch it up and do a running stitch, because obviously we can't do a whip stitch that wraps around where we have the arm sticking out here. So I'm just gonna switch my technique, and instead of going up from the bottom each time, I'm gonna go down through the fabric and then up through the fabric. So I'm really having to push my needle because now I'm going through 3 pieces of felt instead of just 2. And I'm going to create that little dashed line stitch that we practiced on the first day. And just like our whip stitches, I really want to make sure that my running stitches are small and evenly spaced. So I'm making sure I like where my needle comes up before I pull it all the way through. That one looked a little crooked to me. There we go, that's better. And I'm making sure that my needle is going through all 3 layers of felt this time. And I'm just gonna keep on stitching until I get to the end of my arm. Eventually you're gonna get to the end of your thread, or it's gonna be time to clean up for the day. When you need to stop sewing, you need to tie a knot in this thread so that your stitches don't come out when you take your needle off. So in order to do that, I'm gonna remove my needle, and I need to make sure that I left a long enough piece of thread that I can actually tie a knot. If your thread is really short, it's gonna be way too hard for you to do this step. So I like to leave a piece about as long as my hand. Then I'm just gonna twist it into a loop. I'm going to put the end of the thread through the loop. And then before I pull it tight, I'm gonna sort of wiggle that twisty part down to where it touches the felt. Now, once I've got that twisty part right there, I'm gonna put my finger on it, and then I can pull the knot tight under my finger. This takes a little practice to get the knot down close to the felt, but just do the best you can. If it's not quite as close, you can always try again to get it a little closer. Then once you have your knot, you can just trim off the extra. Make sure you don't trim off the knot as you do that, and then put any extra pieces inside of your felt, and it will be there ready for you to start sewing next time.